Welcome to Butterfly Recaps. In the opening scene, we're introduced to a journalist named Justin Sanderson, who's known for his investigative courage. He's currently at the airport preparing for his journey to Paris, France. As he enters the terminal, he notices a familiar book resting on a shelf titled The End of Civility. It turns out the book is his own creation. Curious, Justin makes his way towards the bookshelf, only to stumble upon a fellow traveler named Joan Jackson. Joan recognizes Justin immediately and says that he's a big fan of his work. He then excitedly asks for an autograph, showing appreciation for his fan support. Justin personally buys a copy of his book and signs it for Joe. Later on, while waiting in the airport terminal, Justin talks with his wife over the phone. She appears to be sad about his departure, claiming that she will be lonely. Anyway, Justin explains that he has witnessed something highly unusual, which has persuaded him to go on his journey and gather more information about it. As the two continue talking, a strange series of coincidences catches his attention. The date today is October 15th and the flight number is 1015. Furthermore, an unexpected delay in the departure time means that the plane will now be taking off at 10:15 instead of 9:30. After a while, the passengers, including Justin, proceed to board the awaiting flight. As he steps inside, he notices a family having difficulties with their seat arrangements. They are struggling to adjust their children. Surprisingly, Justin offers his own seat to the family, generously accommodating their needs. He then retreats to the main cabin compartment, where he reunites with Joe. As Justin settles into his new seat, he discovers a strange MP3 player hidden behind the seat in front of him. Intrigued by it, he plugs in a pair of earphones and starts the playback of a podcast entitled Enigmatique, featuring an episode titled The Tragic Mystery of the Flight 1015. Surprisingly, the narrator is talking about this very flight. He says that in the next hour, the flight will vanish from the radar, never to be seen again. Hearing this, Justin becomes enthralled and he continues with the podcast. The narrator of Enigmatique then reveals the name of the flight captain, which is Donor. This finally makes Justin worried, so he urges a fellow passenger to listen to the podcast, hoping that he's wrong, but the man rudely refuses and relocates to a different seat instead. Because of this, Justin finds himself compelled to continue listening to the podcast, unable to shake off the mounting unease. After that, the narrator foretells that a bird will collide with the aircraft precisely at 10:21. To Justin's astonishment and horror, a bird indeed strikes the plane at the exact designated time, intensifying his panic-stricken state. In a desperate bid to regain composure and calmness, he rushes to the restroom and tries to calm himself by repetitively reassuring himself that the past is the past. After this, Justin goes back to his seat and calls one of the flight attendants, seeking clarification regarding the bird accident and the strange engine noise. However, the flight attendant claims to know nothing about such incidents. He even declines Justin's request to talk to the captain, claiming he doesn't want to create an unnecessary scene. In response, Justin shouts in anger, something which he hasn't done in all his life, but he soon realizes his mistake and apologizes to the flight attendant, assuring him that he will shut up. With this scene of composure, Justin resumes the podcast, in which the narrator ominously declares that the airplane will vanish at precisely 11:15, with the pilot's final words, "Good night, New York." Hearing this, the poor guy becomes even more anxious and restless, so Justin finally gets up in search of some clues. He soon discovers that the passengers on this flight can see the pilots in the cockpit through an array of cameras. The podcast further explains that a device interfering with the flight's communication system may be responsible for the perplexing circumstances. Filled with suspicion, Justin fixates on two foreign men who are busy on their devices. He then approaches them and rudely asks them to turn off their phones. However, in response, the two men assert that their phones are on airplane mode. This makes Justin upset and he gets into an argument with them until flight attendants intervene, instructing him to return to his assigned seat. Following this, Justin delves deeper into the podcast and learns about a gentleman named Hudson, a fellow passenger in the same flight to France. Turns out he's going to testify against the Russian mafia. This makes Justin suspect that the flight may have been sabotaged due to the mafia's involvement, but he also thinks that there is a high chance of the presence of an undiscovered U.S. Air Marshal on board who possesses crucial knowledge regarding the safety of the aircraft. With this newfound information in mind, Justin, for one more time, goes to a flight attendant and requests to speak with the Air Marshal. However, the flight attendant, understandably annoyed by his persistent inquiries, asks him for a huge favor to remain in his seat. With no one to listen, Justin goes to Joe and confides in him. Joe, being a pilot himself, says that the Air Marshals often possesses a similarly deceptive mindset to that of a tourist, accidentally persuading Justin to investigate the Russian passengers' belongings. Justin then sneaks into the Russian passengers' luggage compartment and begins checking their bags while they are asleep. The other passengers in the plane notice this, but Justin doesn't stop. As he attempts to open the overhead cabin, he unintentionally drops a bag of one of the Russian passengers. This causes a scene and the two men start arguing. Just then, Justin spells out the fact that the Russian mafia intends to execute Orlov, sending everyone into a state of panic. Even Orlov himself emerges from the first class section worried and scared. In order to resolve the situation, Captain Donner walks out of the cockpit and warns Justin against causing further problems. The other passengers also start recording him, forcing Justin to silently return to his seat. Then he turns the podcast back on and narrator shockingly reveals that Justin is the one who's directly linked to the flight's disappearance. In addition, he plays the audio of Justin's previous interaction with the Russian passengers. This leaves Justin completely speechless. But before he can react, Captain Donner takes him to the flight attendant's dude, just continues arguing and warns the captain not to utter the phrase "Good night, New York," as it will be the last thing they hear before the flight vanishes. This convinces the captain that Justin is mentally unstable and experiencing a psychotic episode. Shortly after, the Air Marshal finally reveals their identity and arrests Justin for threatening the entire flight. Justin is now seated alongside the U.S. Air Marshal, who tells him that he will receive immediate psychological assistance once they land. Nevertheless, Justin still tries to convince her that he's not undergoing any form of mental breakdown and asserts that he possesses evidence of what is about to unfold. However, it's not enough to persuade the Air Marshal. She then goes to the pilot for a discussion. While she's away, Joe approaches Justin and expresses his belief in him. He also suggests that the mere fact of being aboard this plane signifies the realm of possibilities. After careful consideration, Justin proposes that Joe, being a pilot himself, take control of the aircraft and land it in Canada or somewhere safer before it vanishes. But for this, Joe requires a passcode to access the cockpit. Justin is pretty confident that the code is 1015 since everything that is happening here revolves around that number. With this information, Joe enters the cockpit, incapacitates the captain, and forcibly takes the control of the plane's operations. This instills panic among the passengers, but before they can react, Joe lowers the cabin's air pressure, eventually causing everyone to lose consciousness in a shocking turn of events. He then utters the haunting words, "Good night, New York." Later we see Justin waking up on the shore of an island with a floating doll next to him. It becomes evident that their flight has crash landed in water. Justin freaks out and looks around, but no other people are in sight. Shortly after, he discovers the same MP3 player and decides to play it again. The podcast narrator continues to recount the second part of Flight 1015 as per the narration, and an extensive search was conducted for the flight, but the efforts were in vain. After several days, cargo ship fortunately discovered small strip of land where all the survivors except for one had managed to stay alive. The narrator mentions that Justin was reported missing as he could not be found anywhere on the desolate island. At the same moment, Justin looks up and spots the entire flight crew and passengers approaching him. Understanding understandably unnerved by the circumstances, they hold Justin responsible for the plane crash and began to assault him physically. This results in his unfortunate death. Thank you for watching for today, and goodbye.